program design is a good dynamic warm-up. And we do this warm-up, it's single leg, it's dynamic, working on dynamic flexibility and proprioceptive input. Proprioceptive input, just think of our nervous system and the stabilizers through our hips, knees, ankles, lower back. We want to be able to wake all those up, get them to do their job basically, think of it that way. So basically we want to think about what a good dynamic warm-up does is it raises the core temperature, it elongates muscle activity, it's activation of our proprioceptors, like I just explained with those R's, are the stabilizers in our central nervous system basically, and it's ingraining proper motor patterns. So the key to the best active warm-up exercise is that they activate one muscle while they're elongating another. And what are we doing here? We're activating the glutes, the hamstrings, the stabilizers of the hip, like we were talking about, to help protect the knee, but also we want to fire all these muscles up, get them ready for the training program, whether it's the power, the strength component, or the conditioning component. But we always want to do this before our warm-up, before our strength programs. We do this before we play. And quality does matter. Quality is very important on this because basically these joint mechanics we're teaching are joint mechanics of running, walking, whatever it is, but we're doing it in multi-direction, all three planes. We're doing it in the sagittal plane, frontal plane, think lateral, and we're also doing it in rotational plane. All the movements that occur during sport, but we're warming our athletes up in that environment to get them ready to play. Okay, before we get into the active warm-up, one thing I didn't mention in the column is self-myofascial release. It's basically releasing knots and parts of the muscle that get tight, which is usually going to be hip flexors or external rotators. We want to release those knots before we stretch them, because if you stretch a knot, you're just going to tighten it, and the muscle's actually going to start to get micro tears around that knot, and you're going to end up getting injured. So first I'm just going to have her show you, she's just going to roll out her butt here real quick. So we can do a self-myofascial. This is just basically trigger point release. So we're either going to do the glutes, but like I said, usually what's going to be tight is her hip flexor. So she's going to turn over and roll out her hip flexor real quick for you. Let's get to the, yeah. So right here now, she's turn it over a little bit more. There we go. So right here, she's going to be getting her hip flexor where we get tightness. We want to be able to get this released before we stretch it. So basically, we would roll out the whole body here. We go quad, IT band. We just work all around the legs here, even the calves, even the upper body. So that's good. And then, since we just rolled out the hip flexor, she's going to get into what we call a warrior lunge stretch. So right here, she's going to now drive her hip forward. And now that we got the, we released the hip flexor, now we're going to stretch it. We're just looking to get some healthy tissue length here because we want to have a concern for tissue quality. So this is going to be done. We'll always do a certain amount of stretches and rollouts before we get into the actual dynamic warm-up. Okay, now we're going to be doing some activation for the glutes and the hip flexors. Think of extensors and flexors. So what she's doing here is we're going to get this glute activated, which is very important for hip extension. And then as you see here, she's putting pressure on the knee above 90. We're getting a hip flexor that's very important for stabilization of the pelvis and the femur when we're talking about protecting the knee going valgus, especially when we're talking about. Okay, another activation exercise we're going to do here is what we call our glute medius. Think of these muscles, these abductors on our butt. This muscle also is responsible for stabilizing the femur, keeping that knee from going valgus. So it's just basically a mini band X walk. She's going to walk to the left here. That's the right, but that's all right. So she's activating these muscles here, as you can see. So she's going to go left now. This basically is just a simple activation. Okay, this isn't, we're not getting any mobility here. We're just activating now these very important stabilizers of the pelvis again and of the femur. Okay, so what we're going to be doing here, this is what I was talking about in the column, when we want to activate and lengthen a muscle at the same time. These three lunges I'm going to show you. This is now what I explained in the column is sagittal. In other words, think about just split the body in half, moving forward, okay? So this is just basically a static lunge. It's going to look like a lunge that we would do in a workout. She's going to come up. So when she's getting down into this movement, we're getting hip flexor stretch here, come back up, and we're warming up the quads, okay? So this is going to be what the first plane is going to be our sagittal plane. Just think about stepping forward and back. We're going to be moving to our frontal plane. Think side to side, lateral plane here. She's going to lunge to, think of a lateral squat to the right. Now we're getting adductor stretch. Once again, we're warming up our quads here. So come in and out, come to this side. She's going to be get really good and mobile. Keep going. She's going to get really good at mobile, going side to side, getting these adductors, think groin muscles stretched. She's also warming up her quads as well. Now the third plane is going to be the transverse plane. Think rotational. As you're going to see here, we have a 90 degree with her hips here, okay? This is going to get her quads once again, but it's going to get a different part of her adductor or groin muscle as she gets into this lunge. So once again, we're getting that adductor quad warmed up. Back up. Down. So we're looking at the transverse, think rotational plane here. We always want to get all three planes of motion because this is what occurs in sport on the field, court or mat or play. And now we're going to do more mobility. This is where we were talking about the focus on, the same as those lunges I just showed you. We want one muscle elongating and we want the other muscle getting activated. So she's going to do a knee hug here. Go. Right now we're activating her hip flexor, stretching the glute, and on this opposite side she's activating her glute. So we're getting elongation and activation. This is one of the keys to an effective dynamic warm-up. Also, the quality has to be there. She has to have a nice tall spine through this, getting good extension through the hip, and getting flexion from the hip flexor. So we don't want any leaning back. That's why quality is very important, because this takes away from the effectiveness of this warm-up. The next one she's going to do is going to be a cradle walk. On this one, she's getting her external rotator stretch. Once again, on this opposite side, she's getting her glute activated, and we're also getting our adductors activated here, our adductor flexors. So think of adductors flexing up. So we're getting that stretch and activation as well in this exercise. And it's very important to get that mobility through these external rotators, because a lot of times these can get tight, which will affect knee stability. Next one is a reverse lunge walk. Once again, we're looking at elongating and activating muscles here. So she's going to start. So now we're getting that hip flexor on this other side when she comes back this way, and we're getting the quad warmed up, hip flexor on the other side, and the glute is actually activated. So we're getting that stretch, activation, activation. Okay, now we're going to be working hip hinge, which is basically we want to think of activating the glutes and hamstrings, but when we're in a single leg movement here, she's going to drive that right leg back. So you get activation here, and stretching the back hamstring and up. And activation. So we're getting that activation on the glute and hamstring. Now she's going to turn and face the camera. Let's go with this leg back now. And also you're going to see here, as I explained in my last column, about how things change when we get on single leg and support a single leg. So go. Now what we get here is what we call the deep longitudinal system. She's getting this activation up. The core is now working in anti-rotation to stop her body from actually twisting into this movement, her knee going valgus. You can come back up and go one more time. So what we're getting here, activation through the glute, comes across the body, up through the oblique, and up through the lat here. So that's why, back up. So it's an actual comes across the body like this when we get a single leg to help stabilize the hip, the femur, and protect the knee. And that's why these single leg movements are so vital, and especially this exercise, getting those glutes, adductors firing to protect the knee. Okay, now we're going to do now she's going to give me a forward skip. So now we're just working on those joint mechanics we worked on in the warm-up. Now we've got everything activated. We're going to just get the nervous system fired up by doing some ground force absorption and reaction and creating force. She's going to do a high skip now. We're going to go lateral with this warm-up. She's going to give me lateral skips. Once again, we're producing and absorbing force. As you can see, that knee drive and extension on the opposite side. Preparing the body to move, basically, here. Good. Okay, now she's going to give me a lateral shuffle. You're going to see this all the time in sport too. Go. So once again, we're working on that mobility in the hips and teaching her how to shuffle right. So these are ingraining movement patterns that are important for sport, basically.